If you feel like you have a hard time actually getting the things done you want or need to do and reaching your creative potential, this one's for you. As people who use our creativity for work, we enjoy varying amounts of freedom. If we're working for someone else, that's obviously going to be less freedom than if we're our own boss. But in both cases, we have to be careful to recognize that the freedom we get in our creativity can easily veer off into aimlessness. We need discipline, and the more freedom we have, the more discipline we need. In this episode, I'm going to run through 5 ways we can be our own boss and integrate some discipline into our creative pursuits without losing the joy. If you're new here, welcome to Keep the Flow. I'm Scott McLemore, a drummer and composer living way up north in Iceland. I make these episodes every week to look under the hood of the creative process to keep our creative engines humming. So I used the phrase be our own boss before. These words get thrown around a lot when people think about starting their own firm or working freelance or becoming successful enough as an artist to quit your day job. I think people use it meaning to become free from supervision, which I totally get. As someone who hates being told what to do, I deeply relate to the attraction of autonomy. But if we really look at what this is saying, a boss is a person we answer to. It's someone who makes sure we're doing what we're supposed to, not slacking off, not scrolling mindlessly when we should be working. And when we're talking about being our own boss, what we should mean is having the self-discipline to hold ourselves accountable to doing the work we need to do. Now more than ever, we need to cultivate this kind of discipline. Even if you still work for someone else, if you're dependent on your boss to keep you in line, that's not a recipe for success. How we behave when no one's looking is really the key to realizing our dreams. And as creative people, we are more at risk of letting ourselves go astray than at any time in history. Distractions used to mean seeing something out the window or getting an unexpected call from a friend in the middle of the day. But now distraction is an industry unto itself. There are people hard at work trying to figure out how best to distract you and keep you distracted for the longest time possible. Actually, they have algorithms for that now, but there are people hard at work coding algorithms to be hard at work trying to distract you. So here are 5 ways we can inject some discipline into our creative lives to really be our own boss and show up for ourselves. The first thing we need if we're thinking about keeping ourselves on track, we have to know which track we're on. Where is this train going? We need a destination. We need a goal. Setting goals that are achievable and clear can free us up to focus on the work. Not that we have to be rigid. Goals can change. Situations change. Inspiration can strike when we least expect it, and we realize we need to hop off at the next station and switch trains. Creativity is fluid, but if we don't have an idea of what we're trying to do, it's hard to make progress. That being said, I write a lot of my music starting from a completely undefined place. I'll sit down at the piano and put my hands down and just start playing some random notes without thinking about what key I'm in or what meter, just completely random. And gradually something will emerge, most of the time. But doing that is a decision. If we stick with the train metaphor, it's like if I'm just wandering around the station, checking out all the trains until I wander onto one of them, just as it's pulling out. The destination reveals itself. But in order for that to happen, I have to make myself go to the station. I have to make sure I'm seriously checking out all the various trains and not just staring at my phone. In this case, my goal is to compose, but I allow it to take shape almost on its own. And it doesn't always work, but that's okay too, as long as I'm putting in the effort and setting the intention. So however we come to find our destination or set a goal, once we have an idea of where we want to go, we have a more defined objective, that is, something we can measure if we're making progress or not. And the more we can narrow this down, the easier it is to be disciplined. When I say I want to be a composer, that's very broad. But when I say I want to write enough music to fill a vinyl LP, or I want to finish one song a week, those are much more specific goals. But remember, these need to be achievable. We don't want to set the bar so high that we feel like it's impossible or we feel like we're constantly failing. Eventually, those kind of expectations will lead us to stop trying or even burnout. The second thing which makes discipline in our creative pursuits easier is having some sort of routine. The repetition of sticking to a routine makes discipline easier because we don't have to think about it. We don't have to have this thing hanging over us and wonder where can we find the time to do it. All those thoughts, all that energy that we put into thinking about engaging in creativity is freed up. We know when we'll do it, the same time we always do it. Whenever I'm procrastinating about anything, it keeps coming up in my thoughts. A good chunk of my mental power goes to worrying about stuff. It's like hitting the snooze button over and over whenever it comes up in my thoughts, and yet it doesn't really go away. Having a routine allows us to have a much more positive internal dialogue, and thoughts about creativity become more about the ideas themselves instead of feeling bad that we haven't accomplished enough. I'll be honest, this is a major struggle for me. I rejected the idea of routine for most of my life. I think that was one of the things that attracted me to having a creative career. Just the idea that we creative types don't work 9 to 5. We follow the inspiration, wherever, whenever. Which is still true to a certain degree. However, I've come to learn that, as much as I hate to admit it, having some structure in my weeks suits me surprisingly well. Knowing I'm going to show up at a certain time and place is a way of reducing the friction and indecision around my creative pursuits. There's no guarantee that I'll produce something great or even usable. Sometimes nothing comes of the time I put in, but I know that not putting in the time will definitely produce no results. It's a little like playing the lottery with much better odds. Increasing the quantity of time we regularly put in increases our chances of doing great work. When we have a regular time and place dedicated to our creativity, we never have to ask ourselves if we feel inspired or when we might get a chance to work on that idea from the other day. Those issues have already been resolved. Having a routine also gives us a metric that we can look at in terms of being our own boss. If we were working for someone else, they would expect us to show up on time and actually do what we're there to do. If we can turn that into a habit, our inner boss will name us Employee of the Month every month. The third thing we need to deal with is eliminating distractions. This may be the hardest part of being our own boss, especially if we work with digital tools. People have to resort to all sorts of tricks these days. I've heard about people leaving their phone on the other side of the room when they're working, or locking their phone in a jar with a timer on it. Some people delete all the apps off their phone except for the absolutely necessary ones. I'm all for reducing our social media consumption, which accounts for much of the distractions that we battle on a daily basis. But if you work on a computer, all of that social media stuff is there too. But it's not only that. If you work from home, as I do most of the time, the kitchen can be a serious distraction. Just the knowledge that there is a potential snack in the next room can be a problem. So short of putting a timed lock on the kitchen door, no technological trick is going to fix that. I think the distractions as a whole need to be handled internally, which is easier said than done, especially if you're neurodivergent like me. But I think the best solution to distraction is flow. When we get into the flow state, it's easy to forget what time it is, to lose ourselves in the creativity. If someone calls our name, we don't hear it the first time because it sounds like it's coming from another dimension. It's a wonderful place to be, but getting there isn't automatic. We have to figure out what are the things that prime us for the flow state, and that's going to be different for everyone. It might be certain music that we put on that sets a mood or the way we light the room. This is starting to sound like dating advice. It's similar. We're trying to coax ourselves into a certain headspace. For me, I think driving in silence triggers my idea machine. A lot of times a melody will come to me, or an idea for an album cover, or a topic for a podcast. I'll pull over and record it into my phone, and when I get where I'm going, I can't wait to get into it. This relates back to an episode I did on the power of boredom. However, just getting ideas isn't the flow state. For me, that's kind of the gateway drug to the flow state. When I get excited about ideas, that's what primes me to get sucked into the phase where I'm processing the ideas. And this is where I completely lose myself. Also, reaching back to the idea of having a routine also helps eliminate distractions. When it becomes just what we do at that time, we condition ourselves to direct our focus on this one thing. Number four is what I like to call joyful accountability. The phrase holding ourselves accountable makes me feel icky somehow. Just the thought of that makes me want to rebel and not do anything. I'm sure that doesn't describe everyone's feelings about it. Maybe I'm weird. Okay, admittedly, I'm weird. But I think we can turn accountability into something positive. Setting deadlines for ourselves is not always realistic in creative pursuits. It's often hard to quantify or measure our work. However, if you're a writer working on finishing a book, if you have an editor and publisher, they will certainly have deadlines and expectations of a finished manuscript at some point. So it makes sense to try to impose the same structure on ourselves if we're independent, self-publishing writers or musicians or artists. But instead of putting stress-inducing deadlines on ourselves, what if we reframe the whole situation to celebrate our successes? What if we set up a reward for ourselves whenever we realize a certain goal or complete a project? When I release my next album, I'm going to have a big party, or take the band out to dinner, or I'm going to buy that snare drum I've been wanting. Whatever the reward, there's a carrot instead of a stick. There's positivity instead of guilt and regret. The whole concept of deadlines has the reverse effect on me. I mean, the line that if you don't cross on time results in death? Are you kidding? I'm out. If we can shift the focus from the threat of failure to the allure of success, I think we'll all be more successful. The fifth and final thing we need to try to implement is when we say we want to be our own boss, is if you're going to be your own boss, be a good one. Be your ideal boss. When we think about being disciplined and keeping ourselves on track, on time, on schedule, and avoiding distractions, we have to remember to also be nice. What would your ideal boss be like? If we could choose our own boss, what qualities would they have? So take out a sheet of paper or open your favorite writing app and write down a description of your ideal boss. Here's mine. My ideal boss would give me a long leash. They would trust my judgment and value my opinion. They would demand my best and reward my successes, but shrug off my failures. They would encourage me with every opportunity to try new things and pursue my curiosity. They would see me slacking off, and instead of scolding me, they would sit down and strike up a conversation about something of interest to me and refocus my attention on something more productive. They would notice the effort and time I put into the work and thank me for it. If they notice that I'm working too much, they'll ask me to take a break, but not too long. They would also have respect for my boundaries and factor in my family life. They would make sure the work environment was pleasant and make the workplace a fun place to be so that I look forward to going there. When I read back over this list of attributes, those are the things I need to develop in myself in order to truly be my own boss. So often we can fall into a negative internal dialogue. We can be cruel to ourselves and really be our own worst enemy. I feel like I've gotten much better about this in the last couple of years. These days, when I catch myself making a mistake, instead of calling myself a moron and feeling shame or disappointment, I laugh at myself. It's really as simple as that. Of course, none of us wants to make mistakes, but scolding ourselves isn't going to inspire better work. Just like if you had a boss that would say demeaning things to you every time you screwed up, you wouldn't want to work for them very long. But when the voice is coming from inside, we can't just look for another job. When we're the boss, we need to remember to give ourselves grace and really self respect in the most literal sense. So, to implement these 5 ways to be more disciplined in our own creative pursuits, I think it's really helpful to make a plan and create visual reminders. And you could get really creative with this and make a giant mural or hang up inspirational phrases like, be your ideal boss. It's not really my style, but you do you. For me, a simple reminder once a week on my phone or computer is enough to reinforce these ideas. It's a little ironic because you could also see that as a distraction. I've turned off most notifications so I can tolerate the ones that I set up for myself to help me. Thanks so much for hanging out. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow.